and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music. With me, your trustful 80s servant, the 80s mixtaper. No massive rants about AI to kick off the episode this week. Today, we kick into the end of June 1982 and the back six tracks of Playlist 43. David Essex drops a perplexing track about going out on the town. Captain Sensible drops one of the most surprising hits of the entire decade. Asia gets trapped in the heat of the moment. We get some beautiful reggae by Dennis Brown. Dexys Midnight Runners released the biggest single of 1982 and a song which will bring a lot of weddings to their drunken climax even to this day. And we end the episode on the Rock 1 setting of a Casio organ. As always, due to copyright laws, we can't play the songs on the pod, but to circumvent this inconvenience, you will find the hyperlink playlist for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description, plus a full track listing, meaning you too can play along with this musical adventure at home. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. We start today in a peculiar fashion. It is 1982 and you are standing outside a nightclub in the West End of London. Maybe it's the Wag Club, a place festooned with burgeoning synth pop and new wave royalty. Maybe it's the Camden Palace. The air is thick with the scent of Harmony or Inset hairspray and Brute aftershave. The charts are crawling with perfectly sculpted razor-sharp human beings. The Human League, Duran Duran, ABC. These are people who look like they were manufactured in a high-end appliance factory to deliver the future directly to your stereo. And then, stepping out of a cab, comes David Essex. Now, we last met David in 1980, riding along on the roaring grease-stained leather of Silver Dream Machine, a track that paired his classic easygoing pop-rock charm with the high-octane theatricality of the motorcycle racetracks. It went straight into the UK top 5. He was a bona fide star of the stage and screen, the original Che in London's production of Evita, the sparkly blue-eyed darling you wouldn't trust your mum with. But 1980 was a lifetime ago in pop years. By 1982, the acoustic guitars and the gritty Barrow Boy leather jackets felt like relics. The kids were using Lindrums now. They were wearing pink lipstick and asymmetric haircuts. So what does a 34-year-old theatrical icon do to prove he's still got his finger on the pulse? He digs deep into the electronic toolbox, throws on a sharp suit, and tries to explain the concept of a night out to a generation that was already living it. He gives us a track called Me and My Girl, Nightclubbing. This is track 8, Playlist 43. Now, I don't like dunking on the songs or the artists on this show. Each song holds specific memories for everybody, but where required, I will point out its artistic flaws. Joe Dolce, please stand up. Does this song sit uncomfortably with you? Because it always has done with me. Now, I like David Essex. Hold Me Close is a great song, and A Winter's Tale is a welcome addition on any Christmas compilation, and that'll be coming up on this pod at some point. But this track just feels like inviting my dad out on the lash when I was 18. Like, stop it. Just to quote some of the lyrics, we tripped the light fantastic and we're on our way. The heavy, heavy sound of pop music. I like your pink lipstick. Just stop, please. Go home. It's a song that arrives like an enthusiastic uncle who has cornered you at a wedding reception to show you that he too knows how to break dance and get down with the kids. The song was released in June 1982 as a 7-inch vinyl single on Mercury Records. It was written entirely by David Essex himself, functioning as an earnest attempt to transition his traditional theatrical pop into the cold mechanical landscape of the charts in 1982. And those lyrics, they are a marvel of literalism. Essex opens the track by walking us through his evening itinerary with the meticulousness of a man reading a checklist. Bathe, get dressed, wear something flashy, trip the light fantastic, and we're on our way. He references the old proverb, Too much work makes Jack such a sad boy. Now we're coming out to play. It just feels like the lyrics are of a man trying desperately hard to sound casual while deploying phrases like trip the light fantastic, which probably last worked as a charm in the 60s. But then he looks around the club, he scans the dance floor, and he observes the youth culture of 1982 like a sociologist in a safari hat. He sings, "Teenage hero, fashion dummy weirdo. I like your pink lipstick." Yikes. On one hand, contemporary music critics at platforms like Rate Your Music would later describe the track as a robotic, rather charmless number about dad dancing amongst the younger set. Decades later, a live retrospective review from The Guardian would brutally dismiss it alongside his other theatrical personas, calling it a dreadful Joe Jackson-style affair. Yet, despite the critical side-eye and the inherent awkwardness of a 1970s pin-up trying to blend in with the Blitz kids, the British public bought it. The song entered the UK singles chart in late June 1982 and climbed its way all the way to number 13, securing David Essex a major top 20 hit after a period of relative chart absence. He even took to the stage on Top of the Pops to perform it, all bouffant hair and more dinner suit. It proved that Essex didn't need to be actually part of the underground club subculture to still win the charts. He just needed enough pop craftsmanship to package it into a 3-minute single. It remains an unusual bridge between his gritty 1980 Silver Dream Machine era and the adult contemporary successes that would later follow, such as A Winter's Tale, a brilliant song we'll hear in upcoming episodes. And while we're on the subject of peculiar hits, this next song might be the unlikeliest number one of the entire decade, and it's only 1982. I can't speak for the adult or teen perspective of this song growing up, which is a shame as this person was a major player in the punk, post-punk and goth scenes, but as a kid this song had me transfixed, just as it also transfixed mums, dads, nans and grandpas listening to Radio 2. Brace yourselves folks, this is Happy Talk by Captain Sensible, our track 9 today. I hope that one brought back a lot of happy memories for you all. For me personally, this is breakfasts at my nan's, 20 years since departed sadly. With Radio 2 on in the background, love you Nan. But let's get into just how bonkers this song really is. Happy Talk by Captain Sensible is an incredibly surreal moment in British pop music history. In the summer of 1982, the UK singles chart was captured by a brightly coloured punk rock musician who wore a red beret, massive sunglasses, and decided to cover a 1949 show tune. The song spent 2 weeks at number 1 on the UK singles chart, completely defying his reputation as a chaotic member of a raucous rock band. Picture the scene in late June 1982. The UK charts are dominated by synthesizers, sophisticated new wave and smooth pop. And right there, climbing above Odyssey, the Steve Miller Band and Charlene, is a guy named Raymond Ian Burns, better known to the world as Captain Sensible, the co-founder and guitarist of the legendary punk rock band The Damned. He has teamed up with an indie pop trio called Dolly Mixture to record a song originally written by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein for the Broadway musical South Pacific. It makes no logical sense. It's a sugary, unpretentious, incredibly catchy melody that won over audiences completely detached from the underground punk scene. It was never meant to be a massive hit. It was recorded almost as an afterthought. Let's look back at the origins of the man under the red beret. Born in Balham, London on the 24th of April 1954, Raymond Burns grew up loving music, including Syd Barrett-era Pink Floyd and the Soft Machine. He attended Stanley Technical School for Boys in South Norwood. The very first musical instrument he experimented with was a Bontempi organ. By the mid-1970s, he was working as a toilet cleaner at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon, a humble start for a future chart topper. In 1976, he co-founded The Damned alongside Brian James, Dave Vanian and Rat Scabies. The Damned earned a historic place in rock history by being the very first British punk band to release a single, New Rose, in October 1976, beating the Sex Pistols and the Clash to the punch. They were also the first UK punk band to release an entire studio album, Damned, 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 in February 1977, and the first to tour across the US. Initially, Raymond played bass guitar for the group. His stage moniker Captain Sensible was entirely ironic, given his reputation for eccentric on-stage antics. When guitarist Brian James left the band after their brief initial breakup, Sensible switched over to lead guitar for their 1979 comeback album, Machine Gun Etiquette. As the late 70s turned into the early 80s, the Damned began to evolve. They moved away from the raw three-chord punk sounds and began incorporating darker tones and atmospheric arrangements, pioneering the goth rock shift visible on their 1980 release, The Black Album. They were serious musicians making dark, brooding alternative music, and actually we'll hear our first Damned song on this pod soon. So how did a pioneer of punk and goth rock end up singing a show tune? In the early 1980s, Captain Sensible signed a solo recording deal with A&M Records. He viewed this solo project not as an exit from the band, but as a creative release valve. It allowed him to record experimental, lighter pop material that simply would not fit the darker style of his main band. He entered Old Barn Studios with producer Tony Mansfield, the mastermind behind the synth pop group New Music, to record his debut solo album, Women and Captains First. During these sessions, Sensible was accompanied by Dolly Mixture, an underground post-punk indie pop trio consisting of Rachel Bohr, Debsy Wykes and Hester Smith. The recording of Happy Talk was far from a calculated commercial move. According to Burns, the vocal was recorded while he was exceedingly drunk, and the song was originally only supposed to be used as album filler. In fact, Mansfield arranged the backing track using a Fairlight CMI computer, one of the earliest digital sampling musical computers in the world, while the Captain was out the room. When the Captain returned to sing over it, he had little inkling it would ever see the light of day as a major release. However, the executives at A&M Records recognised its massive crossover pop appeal. Sensible, however, was fiercely resistant to releasing it as a commercial single, worried it would compromise his punk credentials. To secure his permission, the record company tricked him into believing that another prominent artist was intending to release the same song. Terrified of losing out on the opportunity, the Captain relented. Released as a single, this track made an explosive jump on the British charts. On June the 26th, it entered the charts at number 33. The following week, it vaulted all the way to number 1. It stayed at the absolute peak for 2 weeks, turning a chaotic punk guitarist into a household name and a standard fixture on BBC's Top of the Pops. The single completely outsold every track the Damned ever released. The song's massive success propelled his debut album onto the UK charts later that summer. To Sensible's surprise, the backlash never happened. In interviews, it was noted that instead of feeling betrayed, the Damned fanzines and fans simply found the situation hilarious and let him get away with it because it was so unpretentious and bizarre. It remains one of the most delightfully unpredictable chart victories in history. A song written for a mid-century Broadway musical, sung by a drunken punk icon creating pure pop magic. For track 10, we turn to Asia. Well, actually we stay in Great Britain. In 1982, prog rock is supposed to be dead, buried underneath the weight of its own 20-minute capes and multi-part conceptual suites. Yet, on May the 15th, 1982, a band named after an entire continent did something that defied the laws of punk and new wave. They went straight to number 1 on the Billboard 200 albums chart. They did it not with a sprawling fantasy epic involving castles and horned beasts, but with a short, sharp blast of arena-ready pop rock power. This is our introduction to a collective of virtuosos who decided to trim away the excess and focus on the hook. Let's listen to the lead single that conquered American radio. This is Heat of the Moment by Asia. Press play now. To get under the bonnet of how Heat of the Moment became the #1 selling album track in the United States for the year 1982, we have to examine the pedigree of the 4 already storied men who made it. Asia was formed in London in 1981. They were the definitive British supergroup, a term reserved for bands comprised entirely of musicians who had already tasted massive fame in other legendary projects. The lineup was a prog rock Hall of Fame fantasy draft. John Wetton on lead vocals and bass. Wetton was a veteran of the avant-garde rock scene, having fronted King Crimson during their legendary mid-70s run, as well as playing with Uriah Heep and Roxy Music. Steve Howe on guitars. Howe was the world-renowned mathematically precise guitarist for Yes, a band that practically defined the complex structures of 70s prog. Carl Palmer on drums. Carl was the lightning-fast percussive engine of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a trio famous for selling out stadiums with classical rock adaptations. And Jeff Downes, keyboards. Downes brought the modern edge. He was half of the new wave synth-pop duo The Buggles, the band we met all the way back in episode 5, famous for recording Video Killed the Radio Star, the very first music video ever broadcast on MTV. Downes had also recently played with Howe in Yes on their 1980 album Drama. As Wetton explained later, the band's philosophy was simple. Prog rock was still deep inside the 4 of us, but with Asia we sliced away the fat. We took our 12-minute songs and removed the 10 minutes of noodling. The irony of Asia's signature hit is that it almost never existed. The band spent 5 months writing and recording 9 songs for their debut album at Marcus Studios in London with producer Mike Stone. They thought they were finished, however Geffen record executives listened to the materials and realised they lacked a definitive, undeniable crossover radio hit. Heat of the Moment was the very last song recorded for the album, but it became the first single released. John Wetton had actually started working on the track in 1980 while he was temporarily a member of the rock band Wishbone Ash during their Number the Brave recording sessions in Miami. When he brought it to Jeff Downes, the track evolved completely. In an interview archived on Rediscover the 80s, Wetton revealed the unexpected origin of the song's famous rhythm. The chorus began its life as a 6/8 country song, but when Jeff and I started writing together, we moved the time signatures around and Heat of the Moment emerged. Lyrically, the song broke the tough, macho paradigms of traditional stadium rock. Wetton used the song as a literal, unvarnished apology to his then-girlfriend Jill, who he'd later marry. As Wetton told Songfacts, it starts off with an apology. You've never heard that in a rock song before. I never meant to be so bad to you. It's not exactly the macho rock stuff, is it? He cited the raw emotional vulnerability of Joni Mitchell as his direct inspiration for bearing his soul on the track. The song was propelled into the stratosphere by its music video, directed by the innovative duo Godley and Cream. Utilising a distinctive grid format where changing boxes displayed fleeting, fast-paced images of the band alongside iconic visual anchors like a flaming symbol. The video became a staple of early MTV programming. The commercial reception was astronomical. The single peaked at number 4 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and spent 6 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock chart. Driven by the single, the self-titled debut album spent 9 non-consecutive weeks at number 1 on the US charts, selling over 4 million copies in America alone and eventually eclipsing 10 million copies worldwide. Strangely, while it went megastrophic in the States, it only ever reached number 46 in the UK. While prog purists occasionally balked at the pop sensibilities, the musicianship remained highly complex beneath the surface. The opening crunch of Steve Howe's guitar, Downes' swelling synthesizers and Palmer's precise punctuation proved that virtuosos could dominate the pop charts without sacrificing their technical mastery. And now we return to some reggae as we introduce another of the titans of the genre. The problem with reggae, or at least the way people outside of Jamaica talk about reggae, is that we treat it like a single-person monarchy. We built a throne and we put Bob Marley on it. And we made it seem like there were no heirs to the crown. But in truth, if Bob was the king, Jamaica had already chosen its prince. His name was Dennis Emmanuel Brown. Bob Marley himself called Dennis his favourite singer. He explicitly dubbed him the Crown Prince of Reggae. When the king names you their heir, people are supposed to pay attention. This is Love Has Found a Way, our track 11. Dennis Brown was born in Kingston in 1957. He was a true child prodigy, a boy wonder who started performing publicly at the age of 11. By the time he was 13, Clement Coxon Dodd had signed him to Studio One, the youngest artist ever signed to that legendary stable. His debut album, No Man is an Island, dropped in 1970. Think about what you were doing at 13. Dennis Brown was setting the foundation for the future of Jamaican popular music. Throughout the 1970s, he grew up in public, transforming from a teenage sensation into a foundational pillar of roots reggae and lovers rock. He teamed up with the island's most formidable sonic architects, Winston Niney Holness and ultimately Joe Gibbs. With Gibbs and engineer Errol Thompson, the famous Mighty Two, Brown unleashed a legendary run of albums. Visions of Dennis Brown, Words of Wisdom, Joseph's Coat of Many Colours. In 1979, his re-recorded anthem Money in My Pocket broke into the UK top 20. He was an international star, a cultural icon carrying deep Rastafarian spiritual convictions alongside an unmatched ability to sing a love ballad that could make time stand still. By the dawn of the 1980s, major American record labels were desperate to find the next global reggae crossover act. A&M Records looked at Dennis Brown and thought they had found him. Which brings us to 1982. Brown had relocated to London. He went into the studio with Joe Gibbs to cut his second album for A&M. The title track was a masterclass in smooth, romantic crossover reggae. Love Has Found a Way. If that track sounds like a seamless blend of Kingston soul and international pop slickness, that is exactly what it was engineered to be. The track was produced by his longtime collaborator Joe Gibbs, but the secret weapon behind its emotional weight was a woman named Yvonne Hoshu. Dennis met Yvonne at the Rainbow Theatre in London back in 1974. They married in 1976. Yvonne wasn't just his partner, she was a brilliant, often uncredited lyricist who wrote some of his most enduring hits. While Joe Gibbs frequently claimed the official writing credits on earlier hits like Words of Wisdom, Yvonne was the true pen behind Love Has Found a Way. Lyrically, the song is a pure expression of romantic gratitude and Rastafarian devotion. When Dennis sings, I'm so thankful, baby, that Jah has made you mine, he is completely fusing his spiritual worldview with human love. The music backing on the album relied on the heavy-hitting studio elite that Gibbs always assembled, musicians like Sly Dunbar, Robbie Shakespeare and Lloyd Parks, but tailored with a glossier radio-friendly sheen meant to capture American and European ears. The strategy worked to a degree. The song became a significant crossover success and an instant staple of the lovers rock subgenre. However, the push toward commercial light R&B on subsequent tracks caused tension. It was noted that Brown was constantly balancing his hardcore roots output on his independent Yvonne special label with the slicker global pop reggae demanded by A&M. This creative push and pull ultimately ended his major label relationship with A&M and severed his historic bond with Joe Gibbs. Dennis Brown returned to Jamaica, continuing an incredibly prolific career that yielded more than 75 albums before his tragic death from cardiac arrest in 1999 at just 42 years old. But Love Has Found a Way remains an absolute monument to his vocal genius. The moment the Crown Prince reached for the global pop crown without losing an ounce of his soulful majesty. And while we're on the subject of soulful majesty, yes folks, you're getting lots of crowbarred links this week, it's time for the biggest number one of 1982. Find a pair of dungarees And get ready. We are talking about a song that exists in two completely separate dimensions. In one dimension, it is an indestructible wedding disco standard, often arriving towards the drunken conclusion of the evening, involving a large circle of pissed up people kicking in unison as the track speeds up. But in the other dimension, the real one, this track represents a high stakes pivot of artistic direction, a case of self-confessed aesthetic appropriation and an intense studio battle. I'm talking about a track that deliberately rejected electronic instrumentation during an era heavily dominated by synth-pop. Instead, it relied entirely on acoustic textures, trading in banjo, accordion, fiddle and saxophone. It's time, folks, for Come On Eileen. This is track 12. We last met Kevin Rowland and his collective Dexys Midnight Runners in 1980. At that time, they had achieved a UK #1 single with the utterly brilliant Gino, a brassy tribute to soul singer Gino Washington, and released their critically acclaimed debut album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels. That was way back in episode 7.5, and a contender for the Song of the Year. However, organisational stability was short-lived. By late 1980, the original lineup completely dissolved. Most of the musicians departed due to Rowland's strict group discipline, leaving to form a new band called the Bureau. Rowland was left to rebuild the band alongside trombone player Big Jim Patterson. As Rowland reconstructed the group, he decided to completely abandon the brass-heavy soul aesthetic of their debut. Looking at the UK charts of 1981 and 1982, which were heavily populated by electronic new wave acts, Rowland chose an aggressively organic counter-response. To engineer this new musical direction, Rowland drew directly from his former bandmate, Kevin Archer. Archer had formed a new group called the Blue Ox Babes, mixing soul rhythms and traditional Celtic folk fiddles. Rowland heard their demos and subsequently adopted the exact same approach for Dexys, even recruiting fiddle player Helen O'Hara into his own ranks. In a statement published in Record Collector magazine, Rowland explicitly confessed to this act. "I stole the style of music, the blend of folk and soul, the combination of instruments that was Kevin Archer's, for which I am deeply sorry and regretful. I did not steal the song." With O'Hara and Steve Brennan forming a violin section known as the Emerald Express, the band signed with Mercury Records. They entered the studios with producers Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley to record their sophomore album, Tu Raye. The songwriting credits for the new centrepiece track went to Kevin Rowland, Jim Patterson and Billy Adams. The song evolved through experimentation with rhythms inspired by the driving, syncopated bounce of records like Tom Jones' It's Not Unusual and Wayne Fontana's Concrete and Clay. During production, choosing the lead single came down to a critical decision made by the band's radio plugger, a man named Brad. I don't have his surname, unfortunately. According to an interview with Classic Pop magazine, Brad listened to the tracks and firmly selected Come On Eileen as the definitive choice. Lyrically, the song was heavily shaped by Rowland's upbringing in a strict Irish Catholic household. For decades, fans speculated about the identity of the real childhood friend named Eileen, but Rowland explicitly corrected this record. Speaking with Yahoo Entertainment, Rowland clarified that Eileen was a composite character representing the girls he lusted after as a teenager. The lyrics, including lines about thoughts on the verge of dirty, were written to capture adolescent sexual awakening and a direct rebellion against the religious repression of a previous generation. The track's defining feature is its dynamic arrangement, notably the accelerating, syncopated tempo shift during the bridge that builds into the final chorus. Released in June 1982, Come On Eileen became a massive global phenomenon. It reached #1 on the UK singles chart, becoming the nation's biggest selling single of the year. In April 1983, it crossed over to the United States and knocked Michael Jackson's Billie Jean off the top spot of the Billboard Hot 100. It also went on to win Best British Single at the 1983 Brit Awards. In an interview in Classic Pop magazine, Helen O'Hara said, "I was on cloud 9. That success was a high from beginning to end. I was smiling all the time. The article also revealed Kevin also enjoyed the trappings of fame. I enjoyed success for what it was. You get carried along with the euphoria of having hits. There are moments of doubt doing interviews in America and thinking, no, this should have been better. But the pop thing was fun. I liked doing photo sessions for the teenage magazines because it was bright and positive. Come On Eileen stands as a testament to an artist completely upending his own established formula to capture lightning in a bottle. From a song about Catholic guilt to a song played at weddings, probably an hour before conjugal rites. Let's end today with a Casio organ rhythm. If you were a kid in the 80s with any aspiration of being a synth wizard, well, firstly, your parents probably forced you into piano lessons. It didn't take with me. I quit before the first exam. But my sister to this day is a maestro. And then for Christmas, if you were lucky, came the Casio organ, probably the dinky VL1, and a very specific beat. Which brings us to this band and a one-hit wonder. Let's look at an absolute marvel of minimalist post-punk chart dominance. A song that managed to scale the charts twice, nearly 2 decades apart, using nothing more than a cheap plastic pocket synth, 3 chords, and a profound sense of human apathy. This is Da 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 by Trio, our track 13 and last song on playlist 43. And that sound you just heard, that relentless tiny plastic clicking rhythm, is the sound of that very Casio VL1 we mentioned up top. It was a device that was part calculator, part monophonic synthesizer, and part corporate executive toy. In 1982, that specific toy became the rhythmic backbone for the German band Trio. They used its factory standard Rock 1 rhythm preset and its built-in piano voice. They paired it with a single guitar, a basic drum set, and a lyric sheet that radiated absolute indifference. The full title of the track, and I must apologise now, I'm going to balls this up, I know I am, is Da Da Da, ich lieb dich nicht, du liebst mich nicht, ah ha ha ha. Translated to English, it means exactly what it says. Da Da Da, I don't love you, you don't love me, ah ha ah ha. It's a breakup anthem, stripped entirely of melodrama, romance, and even effort. Let's travel to Großenknetten, a small municipality in Lower Saxony, Germany. This is where Trio formed. The band consisted of 3 men, lead vocalist and keyboard player Stefan Remmler, guitarist Gert Kraller-Krauwinkel, and drummer Peter Behrens. Before forming Trio, the members were already older than your typical new wave upstarts. They were in their early to mid-30s. They emerged on the fringes of the Neue Deutsche Welle, the German new wave scene. However, while their peers were loading up on sophisticated synthesizers and heavily polished studio production, Trio adopted a strict aesthetic ideology of total reduction. Their core musical rule was simple: remove all ornamentation, abandon standard pop polish, and use only the bare minimum of instruments. They were a 3-piece band that insisted on making 3-chord songs. On stage, they completely rejected flashy lighting rigs, opting for extreme minimalism. Remmler would simply play basic rhythms on his Casio VL1, while Behrens notoriously drummed with one hand while eating an apple with the other. Their self-titled debut album Trio was released in 1981 and didn't initially include Da Da Da. The song was recorded later and produced by the legendary Klaus Voormann, the same man who played bass for John Lennon, designed the cover of the Beatles' Revolver, and discovered Trio. Voormann understood their vision. He helped them preserve the raw, toy-like quality of the track. He even brought in Annette Hump from the German band Ideal to provide the deadpan female backing vocals that repeat throughout the track. The single was added to a 1982 re-release of the album, and the world went wild for it. Da 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 went on to become an international phenomenon. It hit number 1 in Germany, Austria, Switzerland and New Zealand. It reached number 2 on the UK singles chart. It sold an estimated 13 million copies worldwide. When they performed it on television, Remmler stood at the microphone completely dead-eyed, casually tapping out the melody on the tiny Casio VL1. But an international mega hit built on a toy keyboard is a difficult trick to pull off twice. Trio released subsequent singles and albums, scoring hits inside Germany. However, they never replicated their massive global crossover success, making them a definitive global one-hit wonder outside Germany. By 1986, after an experimental feature film called Dry Gig and Dry 3 Against 3, and that flopped and mounting internal tensions over financial matters occurred, drummer Peter Behrens left the band, leading to an official split. The story of Trio ends with a sombre note of finality. Guitarist Kralla Krauwinkle passed away from lung cancer in 2014. Drummer Peter Behrens passed away from multi-organ failure in 2016. Today, lead singer Stefan Remmler is the only surviving member of the group. Yet, the song lived on. In 1997, Da 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 found a completely new generation of listeners in the United States. It was featured in an iconic, highly popular Volkswagen Golf commercial. The ad featured two young men driving around town, picking up an old armchair, realising it smells bad, and throwing it back out on the street, all to the tune of Trio's Restless Casio beat. It's also been literally covered by everyone, from Christina Aguilera to Elastica. Maybe those piano lessons could have paid off after all. So that's it for playlist 43. What a fun one that was. But do join us next week as we finally step into a hot July and playlist 44. Every now and again, we get a playlist which is a bit weird, and the first half of playlist 44 is no exception. We do get the hits, and we finally reach the cultural touchstone that is Irene Cara's theme from Fame. Bananarama strike out on their own with Shy Boy, and AC/DC salute the rockers in the first song post Back in Black. But then we genuinely, and I'm not lying when I say this, explore the Postman Pat theme tune. We meet the band with the best name ever, Tigers of Pantang. We hear a John McEnroe parody and end by talking about one of this episode's protagonists, The Damned. As always, if you're enjoying the pod and want to support the show, please do zip over to my Buy Me a Coffee page, the link for which can be found in the episode description, and buy me a coffee. My pod platform renewal is coming up in short order, so any contributions gratefully received. And if you can tickle the subscribe button and leave a review, that would be lovely, please. But until next Friday, have the best week, and we'll see you again on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.